Hey, or Lipe or Max, are we live now so I could share it? Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Locked in Solidarity panel. To those in the room, to those watching at home, I'm so grateful to all of you. Tonight's panel is actually part of a much bigger thing happening right now in the U.S. It's part of CCDA, the Christian Community Development Association. It's part of their week-long initiative to bring awareness to mass incarceration. And so tonight, we just wanted to reflect on it, not just on a national level. Obviously, it's a huge issue and affects many people, but bring it more local to local community stakeholders, to people who are actively involved in the work, and then hopefully to just reflect on some solutions. But before jumping in, I wanted to highlight a few thank yous. I want to thank our tech team making it all possible for the live stream, for those watching on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you to the panelists as well. But most importantly, thank you to Liberty Church. Not every pastor gets to spend an entire Sunday message like I did this past week, talking about mass incarceration from a biblical perspective. Not every pastor gets to host a panel discussion like this, and so I'm eternally grateful for our members who not only believe in the mission of our church, but push Pastor Lipe and myself to do these things. And so for us, if this is your first time ever engaging with Liberty Church, I wanted to share our mission statement that we're a church that exists to be a multicultural, gospel-centered expression, creating a community of faith that experiences God, reconciles all people to God, and engages the community. And we simply kind of break that down into three core values, which is that we love God, we love people, and we love justice. And so everything that we do as a church is motivated by these three core values. And so if we're talking about loving justice, we have to address some tough topics, mass incarceration being one of them. And if we're going to truly love people well, it's going to be addressing things that affect those around us, and it definitely affects our community. And so events like tonight are not the only thing that we do as a church. If you're familiar at all with Liberty Church, you know that this is just the tip of the iceberg for us, but it's an important part of who we are. And so I wanted to kind of start off with a little bit of framing, looking at some statistics to scope out how big the problem is, and also looking at it locally, statistics about Jersey City. But I wanted to start by saying what tonight's panel is not about and what it is about. So it's not about us coming up with a one-step solution. All right, I shared this on Sunday with the message. There is no one-step solution to ending a decades-long system that it was designed to function the way that it is currently functioning. And so we're not looking for that one-step magic bullet at all. It's not a stand against police, although we can be honest saying that police reform is needed, right? You can't have a conversation like tonight with all of the current events happening, not just in Jersey City, but across the U.S., and say, well, policing the way it is set up right now is perfect, right? It's not, right? So we could have an honest conversation, but it's not about bashing police or the work that they do. It's also not a statement against prisons or the rule of law, right? There are psychopaths out there, and prisons are needed, just to be clear. But we can have a conversation about how is the system not working, or how is it falling short. And so that's really what tonight is about. And lastly, tonight is not about planting a political flag. You know, our church, we don't believe that the Democratic Party has the answer, in the same way we don't believe the Republican Party has the answer. So it's not about us making a political stand one way or another. It's just simply about us reflecting on this topic and looking at it and looking to respond. So those are all what it's about. Tonight is about, though, listening and learning. I hope that from what's shared by our panelists that you maybe learn something new or see a different perspective on it. I hope that tonight you have a heart for this issue and how complex it can be, how it's not an easy solution, and how do we wrestle with this. I know I have my own struggles with it and my own wrestling, and then tonight, hopefully, you also see reflected as a church, right, how you have a heart of God in responding here. So I want to share one quick scripture, a couple stats, and then I'm going to stop talking because the panelists are here to talk and not me. Scripture is this, Hebrews 13, 1-3. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. So why are we doing this event? Why are we focusing on it? Well, some of these statistics were shared on Sunday, and I encourage you, if you want to go check it out, it's on our YouTube page and Facebook page. But there is a lifetime likelihood of imprisonment. So if you're a black male, your lifetime likelihood is a 1 in 3 chance of being imprisoned. If you're Hispanic, it is a 1 in 3 chance as a Latino male. And if you are a white male, it is a 1 in 17% chance. Now, statistically, committing of crime is not done at any higher rate. It is done in terms of location and lack of income. Those are the generating factors. And so when we're looking at it, there is a racial component to it that we have to address, right? It doesn't just affect everyone the same. It affects certain communities harsher than others. If you're a woman, you have a 1 in 18 chance of being incarcerated as a black woman. If you're a Latino woman, you have a 1 in 45 chance of being incarcerated. And if you're a white woman, it's a 1 in 111 chance of being incarcerated. So this topic has to address what are the racial tensions behind it, and we'll be getting to that in just a moment. But if you're looking for the scale of it, every single year our nation spends $85 billion on imprisoning citizens. $85 billion, and we spend nearly $250 billion, $250 billion on the entire process. That's both public funds that are spent as well as the private prison institution. Today there are 11 million people that will spend time in jail. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the difference between jail and prison, jail is the temporary holding element of it. And so when you go to jail, you may have been charged with a crime, you may not have been charged with a crime. But of those 11 million people that are going to spend time in jail this year, 70% of them will never actually be charged. So 70% of those 11 million people spend days, months, sometimes even years of their life incarcerated, and yet they've never actually been convicted of a crime. Their main reason for being held there is a lack of resources, a lack of funding. There's currently nearly 2 million people that are incarcerated, and even if you serve your time, you get out, once you get out, you face nearly 48,000 legal barriers stopping you from being successful upon reentry. And luckily, I have my expert here who's had a lot more experience and going to share from that. But just a few more stats, and then I'm going to turn it over. If you're wondering about juvenile justice, this is some of the staggering statistics there, right? Studies show that 97% of juvenile offenders have experienced some sort of trauma in their lifetime. And so we're not addressing the trauma that they're experiencing, we're simply retaliating by incarcerating them. Every year in the United States, 700,000 adolescents are arrested. 700,000. And less than 10% of them are violent crimes. So we're talking about an overwhelming 90% of those that are arrested that are under the age of 18 are not committing violent crimes. They're simply being arrested for acting out in school or drug charges or other misdemeanors. But let's talk about Jersey City, right? For many of us in this room, many of us watching at home, we're Jersey City residents. Well, courtesy of Jersey City Together, here are some of the statistics. And these were a survey done a few years ago, so the numbers might be slightly different, but the core of it is still true. Over 50,000 residents of Jersey City have spent at some point in their lifetime being incarcerated. 50,000 residents of Jersey City at some point in their lifetime have been incarcerated. Currently, over 5,000 are on parole or probation, and 13,000 are currently being incarcerated. These are large numbers, and so this issue isn't just an issue that faces the nation and other states and other cities. This is an issue that hits close to home, and we have tens of thousands of individuals being affected by this. And so tonight's panel, our hope for what we're talking about tonight is mainly focusing on reentry as well as advocacy, which are ways that we can respond to this issue. And so with that, I want to encourage those that are watching at home, feel free to like it, feel free to share, feel free to drop comments. If we have time later, we'll be asking some of those comments so you can interact in the comment sections. But I want to introduce my panelists. I've done enough talking. You don't want to hear from me anymore. So to my left, we have Joshua Rodriguez Jr., not to be confused with his dad, as our graphics designer was, but he's an elder at Cityline Church. He was born and raised in Jersey City, but he also spent significant time working with New Jersey reentry as well, and so that's the perspective that he's coming with, and he could share more about it. We have Pam Johnson, the executive director of the Anti-Violence Coalition here in Jersey City. She's working boots on the ground in creating and preventing violence in our city. And then we have Dwayne Baskerville. He's a community organizer and the founder of Go Get My Kids. And so with that, can you just share 30 seconds about what brings you here tonight? What are your experiences with it? What are you bringing to the table? What are you looking to accomplish? So I'll start with you, Josh.
Sure. Yeah, so thank you. Definitely glad to be here. So my name is Josh. I was exposed to the reentry and specifically like the prison system earlier on through a prison ministry in my church. But fast forwarding after that, my first job out of college was in a halfway house as an employment counselor. So that was like my first exposure to working with men and women that had been incarcerated. And then I ended up spending the next 8 years in different capacities, either connecting ex-offenders, so people that were released from prison, to job opportunities, or community-based organizations, or different resources. So I was able to see a lot of different things, and I think the greatest passion that I experienced through that process was building within me the understanding that redemption was possible for every single one of these people, and that it required partnership with different organizations, different companies, being able to see in their eyes that this person that was released from prison or jail had the capacity to succeed. So that's just how I got connected. And then in addition to that, I do have an uncle who spent 7 years in prison. So that also, even before I was, I was probably 5 or 6 at the time. So that also shaped my perspective of the prison system as well. So.
Well, good evening. My name is Pamela Johnson. I'm happy to be here, and what brings me here is I was invited. And I'm proud to be on this panel discussing a very important issue. Through my advocacy work in Jersey City and in Hudson County, where I'm born and raised, on the South Side, where violence is highly concentrated, there are a lot of issues with the population that we serve, and reentry, incarceration, rehabilitation became one of those issues with a lot of the men and women that we were offering support for and to. And so we just wanted to find a way where we can make an impact there, so we can equip folks to make an impact in their lives and live a successful one. So, whatever we have to do or address when it comes to supportive services, we're here to do that. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dwayne Baskerville. The name of my organization is Go Get My Kids. After working in a community and getting 105 days of peace with no shots fired, I was also, indicted on conspiracy to commit fraud charges. And so for a year, the guys in my community were looking to kill me, and the justice system was looking to incarcerate me. So at the end of a year, by the grace of God, the fellas took the hit off, and the justice system gave me, 2 years of probation. During the course of this process, I had to go to Irvington for an old drug ticket that I hadn't paid. And while I was there, God asked me to ask the young man that I was with what would have made a difference in his life that would have kept him from being incarcerated. And so he sat there and he studied for a minute and he thought about it. And I knew the answer, but it was like God needed me to hear it out of the mouth of the babe. And so after about 5 minutes, he turned to me and he looked at me. He said, if my father would have been here. And so at that point, I heard God say, so do you want to preach in here or do you want to preach outside? I said outside, and bang, they called my name, and I was out. So the longest I've ever been locked up is 9 days. But I have a lot of family members and friends who have spent a lot of time being incarcerated. And like you said, a lot of it is nonviolent. A lot of it is bad decisions. And a lot of it marks them for life. So after hearing gunshots out my bedroom window, I finally decided to stop fighting God, stepped up to the plate, and asked the fellas what they wanted to do. Do you want to play basketball or shoot each other? They decided to play basketball. So if we can give these kids an option in our community, it will make a difference in what goes on in our city. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all three of our panelists for being here tonight. Thank you to everyone watching at home, those in the room. And so we're going to ask a question of each of our panelists, kind of individualized to some of their background, their experience, and then feel free to obviously jump in and add to it. So I'll start with you, Josh. How does our criminal justice system fail to, one, rehabilitate people who are incarcerated, and then how do they also fail on helping people be prepared to re-enter society once they've served their time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And a part of the answer is in that question, right? Because there's two words that should be compared. There's rehabilitation versus punishment. And oftentimes, as I engaged really thousands of men and women who were released from prison, my job was to connect them to employment opportunities, connect them to work in different businesses that would give them a second chance. And oftentimes, I would learn from their experiences that in prison, they weren't really being equipped with any tools that would lead them to any employment success. For example, there's one prison called San Quentin, I believe it's in California, that had a program. I'm not sure if it still has the program, where it is a graphic design program where inmates learn how to do web development, and they're able to utilize those skills in prison. And they also were getting paid at the time about $16 an hour, right? Which, I mean, $16 an hour doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you compare it to the fact that most inmates are getting paid $1 an hour in most prisons, it was pretty significant. So when it comes to equipping men and women that are incarcerated, how have they failed? And giving resources that are relevant once they leave. So educational resources that they can use once they leave. And oftentimes I would engage men and women who did not know how to copy and paste on a computer. Technology moves fast. So if you were incarcerated in 1998 and you're coming out now, you know, computers didn't exist the way that they did now. So one of the things that I've noticed that has been necessary for their success has been educating in technology in that area, because virtually every job application is online. I mean, there's not a lot of paper applications like there was before, you know, in such a short span of time. So I would say some of the things that are very helpful to success have been educational resources. Rutgers University has a program that gives bachelor's degrees to folks that are currently in prison, and that's been a very successful program. Not every prison partners with that program, and of course that's in New Jersey, but that's something that I know has worked to lead to success ultimately. And the last thing I would say is the goal when you are released from prison, if we want to see change, is for men and women not to return back to prison, right? So nationally, 70% of everybody that's released from prison goes back on a national level. The program that I worked for, New Jersey Reentry Corporation, our recidivism rate was 19%. Right? So when you compare 19% to 70%, you have to ask the question, why? And one of the reasons that we learned is that when you give somebody stable employment, right, and you help connect them to stable income, there's a far less chance of recidivism. But not just that, also having the identification they need, and not just that, having support, oftentimes from a religious organization. So different churches where they find a sense of community and good companionship. So, yeah.
So basic support, IDs, and money through a job, and look at that, people stay out of prison. Seems like rocket science, the way that some people pitch it, and yet it's pretty simple, right? Steady employment. So Pam, how does, obviously we could talk about it from a national level, mass incarceration, it's this huge topic that has so many different kind of lanes that it spirals out into, but how does it affect us in the local level of Jersey City, Hudson County, in our neighborhoods, right, in Greenville, in Bergen-Lafayette, and then how does it also affect our schools and our students?
I mean, I think it definitely affects us locally because, you know, so there was a study done not too many years ago. We were in COVID, and you cited a number of how many folks are, you know, arrested in Jersey City from, I think it was New Jersey Together or in New Jersey. This study broke down where in Jersey City these folks are arrested, right? And it was all on the south side of the city in Bergen-Lafayette. It was all in the areas that are concentrated by violence, in the underserved areas. Certain areas of those areas, right, are underserved. In the areas where the census report shows us that there are low-income families, in the areas where we have low-performing schools because we're not properly funding our schools to properly give our children an education, to probably prevent them from making a bad decision, right, or making the only decision. I think that sometimes we look at crime and, you know, it's all on the person for making a bad decision, but in some cases it's their only decision. There was no other decision but to sell drugs, but to try to support your family. So it takes away from the community. It takes away from the business district in Jersey City where they can contribute to and become entrepreneurs. And it takes away from the social environment because we are, snatching folks from in our community for sometimes, crimes that are not violent crimes and putting them behind bars. And a lot of what you said was true about not having the capacity or the resources to even make bail. Folks complain about bail reform and people coming in and out, but no one should be held in jail because they don't have the money to get out, especially if the crime does not suit whatever the bail is. So I think when you remove people from communities, you kind of create an environment where, you're forced to say, I'm not going to make it here. My uncle has been arrested and locked up for most of his life. My dad, my brother, and whoever else there is, right? And you look around your neighborhood and you see people being extracted, taken out of the neighborhood. And so that creates this kind of pit in your stomach and in those communities where folks are not feeling whole. They're feeling, displaced. They're feeling disenfranchised from their own community where they're born and raised. And I think we don't give folks an alternative and a viable and sustainable alternative. So I think that it basically breaks up the community component. When I was being raised, and I know we go back always to say when I was brought up in Jersey City, but I'm going to say that when I was brought up in Jersey City in the late 70s and the 80s and the 90s, there was this village around you. So if we saw somebody who we knew was going to make a bad decision or their only decision, there were people in place. Most of them were, grandmothers and grandfathers who lived in the neighborhood and supported your mom and your dad. And so you were, able to go to them for advice or a hot meal or, just a hug and some love. And so I think that, it breaks up a community as a whole, and it doesn't really say that we're a community about building each other up. We're a community about taking away people who we think don't belong. And so I think that narrative has to change along with resources that will help people live a viable and great, successful life.
Wow, what a powerful thought of removing people that we don't feel belong in that neighborhood or in that community anymore. One of the things I love about Pam as well and the work she does is policing is part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. And so when we're talking about violence in our community, there needs to be alternatives that don't always involve the police, that involves being able to be holistic and addressing needs and responses to lowering that. But
if I could just follow up with
ahead.
that. So, a lot of times activists and advocates, we get a bad name because we're fighting for what we think is right. And what I think is right is what the people told me they want, right? It's not what Pam, thinks is right or what Pam wants. It's what they tell me they need. I'm not anti-police. I work with all police and law enforcement in any capacity that I'm needed. And I think that what we're saying is just what you said. We just know that police are not the answer, right? We call police because something has already happened. And so we're looking for proactive solutions that don't even put police in situations that they can't control because that's not what their expertise is in. And so we want to make sure that we uplift our police and give them the tools and the resources to be successful at their job, but also, have their back when we say, look, we need a more proactive solution that will help our police and help our community at the same time.
Definitely. Agree 1,000%. All right, Dwayne, you ready? So for you, I guess opening question would be, what are some of the pitfalls that cause young people in particular to fall right into the trap of the school to prison pipeline?
Everything that everybody just said. It's continuous. The people say that the system is broken. And I believe that the system works perfectly and that everything that happens on a corner here in Jersey City happens in Buffalo, it happens in Chicago, it happens in California. The kids aren't getting the education. They're either not going to school, they're not going to church. And they're being educated in the streets by the people who love them, but who have been educated in the streets. And they've been lied to so many times that it's hard for them to receive help from the church and community organizations because people promise them things and then disappear. Once they get their names on the paper, once they get their grant, they never see them again. So the best thing that we can do for our kids is recreate the family atmosphere that Pam just spoke about. If the father's not in the home, if the mother's not in the home, generally in our communities, people would step up to the plate and help take care of the kids in our community. Now we have kids sleeping in a park. We have kids sleeping in the hallways. We have kids who are destined to go to prison because at the end of the day, they have to do something that they don't want to do in order to survive. The schools are no longer open to the community to be able to come in and sit down and say, okay, there's someone in here who loves you. Sit down, relax, learn this, excuse me, for yourself. Without that, I think with no guards on the kids, for the kids, that the pipeline is wide open for them. That to sit in the class and get locked up for saying some things to them, to the teacher that offends them, gets them incarcerated and their life ruined. At the same time, let's not forget that some of these kids do bad things. The reality of it is they sometimes make bad decisions, but their options are limited. And I believe if the church and the community organizations, the police department, the politicians, everyone in the community come together in whatever capacity that they could to support prevention rather than waiting for something to happen in the kid's life that he'll regret for the rest of his life.
Yeah, thank you. I think from our own church's perspective, right, we're always talking about what are proactive ways, whether it's us supporting a boys empowerment group at PS22 or investing in New City Kids or investing in Kinsmen of Kings, right? These programs that try to steer kids away from the destination that statistically they're headed for, right? If they're going to low-performing schools, if they're coming from lower-income backgrounds, all of these things. And so being proactive is so important. You've already kind of hit on this, Josh, but we've talked about the failures of helping people as they re-enter, and you've shared about what are some of the ways that people are successful upon re-entry, but I guess even more tailored to how do those watching at home help in that process, whether they have businesses or if they're just like, oh, here, I'm just a teacher, how do I play a role in this? What are some ways that they can help in people being successful upon re-entry?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And first and foremost, there are resources that are out there. If someone is watching and they know someone that has just been released from prison, or if you're here and you know someone that may be in need of that kind of assistance, there's an organization that I worked for quite a few years called the New Jersey Reentry Corporation. And there are 3 main things that organization does for those that have been released from prison, and they're really good at it. They're really successful. They have received some criticism at a local level initially in Jersey City. This was like right before COVID, but they're right back in Jersey City doing the same work. Very successful work. They opened up what's called the Governor's Reentry Training Program, where they teach you how to be a carpenter, electrician, if you want to get into web engineering, if you want to get into all kinds of trades, I mentioned carpentry, I mentioned construction, but if you want to get certain certifications, like your OSHA 30 certification, right? So I think the first thing that you can do if you're not in this position, but you know someone that is in this position, is refer them to a local office. So the New Jersey Reentry Corporation has 9 different locations throughout the state of New Jersey. Of course, the most local one to here is Jersey City, but there is a training program in Kearney, And the whole purpose of that training program is for you to get certified training to get a job. That's the whole purpose. Because what good is training if you can't get a job after that training? So that's the purpose of that training program. And what's great about it is that it will lead to an employment opportunity eventually. It takes time. One of the barriers that is good for you to know, for everyone that's watching to know, is that if you have a criminal background, it's important to know that there are lots of companies that don't want to give second chances because they don't believe in second chances. But I was an advocate for them, and I would go from warehouse to warehouse, from company to company, and say, hey, can you give them a second chance? So I ended up partnering with companies like HelloFresh. I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of HelloFresh. Amazon, everybody?
I might have heard of that one.
Amazon has partnered with us. Ahold in Jersey City, right? They've been a partner. So some larger companies, some smaller companies. If you're a business owner and you have a need, you can partner with a company like the New Jersey Reentry Corporation, right? And I don't have their number, but something that you can easily look up if you have your phone, if you want to write it down, is njreentry.org, and you'll be able to get information. So if you're a business owner, it's worth the investment. One of the things that sometimes business owners fear is, what if I hire someone that has a criminal background and something goes wrong? And the truth is, if you hire anyone, regardless of whether they have a criminal background or not, there is a risk that something could go wrong. But from my experience, we've had a really great track record at connecting the right people to the right position. So really the key is connecting someone who has the skills necessary for that role, right? And that's where we've seen the greatest amount of success, regardless of what the criminal background is, whether it's selling drugs or a manslaughter charge, regardless of what it is, we've seen success if they have the skills necessary for the role. Because also, if you hire someone with a background, these are people that are really hungry. They're not trying to waste time. They're not trying to go back to prison. They have mouths to feed. Some of them have, various children, and they need to provide in that way. So, I believe that investing into those that have been incarcerated is a huge investment for the community and for them as well. I know that was a super long-winded answer, but yeah.
Well, if I could shout out Pam as well. Pam does some of that OSHA certification right on Monticello, or if you're OG Jersey City, Monticello. Having a job is so important. But I also think sometimes the stigma is important to acknowledge and address. I remember an ex-felon when I was living in Pittsburgh shared about how he went from restaurant to restaurant and kept getting no jobs, right? And the moment that he decided, I'm just going to lie and not check the box that I have a criminal background, he got a job, no problem, right? And so even that idea of like, oh, what's the big deal to make people check the box? Well, most employers, once they see that check box, they're done. They're not even going to call that person back. And so understanding that people deserve a second chance is so critical. So with that, Pam, what are ways that we as the community as a whole, those in this room, those watching at home, can respond? And also, how do we hold our elected officials accountable as well? I'm sure that's an easy answer to summarize that two-part question, but whether it's on a local level or state level or national level.
So I think, what we could do locally as people, right? Because at the end of the day, I have a nonprofit, but I'm a person who is a resident just like anybody else, pay taxes just like anybody else. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother now. So I think what we could do is get involved, right? It's good to come out to hear about the issues and to hear about any solutions or any ways to help with the issue. But it's also viable and necessary that, good people who want to do good work for other people connect themselves to other organizations, right? A lot of organizations are, mom and pop nonprofits. They don't have big budgets, and so they work off of volunteers. So, if you know of any organization in your community who is fighting for the rights of other people in any capacity that you see yourself connecting to, you should reach out to them and donate your time, or donate something in your wallet too, because they need some funding. Look around the community right on Pacific Avenue, 312 Pacific, is the Hudson Partnership CMO community space called The Cove. And it is a safe place for youth and young adults to come and be and undergo programming. We have different groups happening, different professionals coming in, and more importantly, it's a safe space, and we always have food, right? And while we're feeding people, we're talking to them and we're engaging them and trying to prevent them from going down the same path as somebody else who we know has done that. And I think it's just important to connect to those organizations. So that's what I would say first, right? Volunteer is great. And I think too, if you're a company and you own a business and it's doing fairly well and you want to know how you can get involved, yes, we need you to employ these folks, right? And we need you to not be scared to do that. Give people a second chance. If you are affiliated with a faith-based, place, or, then you should know that God will want you to do that, right? And if you are a very good person, as you say you are, then you should know that this is your responsibility. So I think, always hold yourself accountable and connect yourself to those folks doing the great work. I think on a local, state level politicians, it is what it is, right? You know who your allies are, and you know who's not going to say anything, and you know who's going to stand up and say the total opposite of what you believe, right? You know who they are. You can do your research to find out how politicians vote, where their advocacy mostly lies, and if you should be reaching out to them or are you wasting your time, right? I don't believe in wasting time because you can't get it back. Right, so do your research with your politicians to see their history when it comes to this issue or issues that affect real people. And don't be afraid to kick the whole table over, right? Everybody wants to be at the table. Sometimes you got to flip the whole table. So don't be scared to assert yourself either. It's for the benefit of people and families will love and appreciate you for that. It's important that we worry about people and not necessarily worry about the other stuff that's around a community. The people are the most important, and so it's necessary for us to advocate for them.
Beautiful. I think Jesus might have flipped the table, if I remember correctly. So,
I bet Jesus flipped the table.
I'll save that for a different day when I get people riled up. Anyway, so Dwayne, you end out our last of our individual questions, and we'll have some group questions. But why is it so important for not just this church, Liberty Church, but churches in general throughout Jersey City, and then broader community organizations to actually care about mass incarceration?
Excuse me. Back in 2006, when we first started working in the community, I went to 17 churches in one day. And I said to the churches that all of these children who have been killing each other every day have agreed to stop killing each other, and invited, excuse me, and I invited, all of the churches to the table, and out of fear, no one from any of the churches ever showed up, except for one parishioner from one church who came in and sponsored our championship game that year. When I go to church, when I listen to church on television, I see that the churches are empty of children, of our youth. Excuse me. And when it comes to having faith, the church has to be at the table. Excuse me, when it comes to having hope, the church has to be at the table. And when you work in a community, there is no love that you can feel from the church. You feel more love in the community from the nonprofit organizations who are always there. God always sends someone or some people to deliver his children from slavery. In my opinion, the 13th Amendment, with the exception clause, allows slavery of our youth, and it's something that's held over our head, in our community to keep us in check. I believe that if we're going to do anything together that's going to make a difference in the long run, is to have the exception clause removed from the 13th Amendment. We could come together as a family, as I said, with all of the organizations and all of the churches. The possibilities of this happening has to be bridged. Someone has to bridge the gap. Ms. Johnson and myself have relationships, and I don't know this gentleman, so I can't say that, but we have relationships throughout the whole community. And together we can invite the church, other organizations, other people to come into the community and work with us to prevent our children from the prison to pipeline, prevent our children who are not going to school from sleeping in parks, prevent our children from losing their lives because they don't know how to communicate with law enforcement. Jersey City's been very lucky in that aspect, I must admit. So a collaboration started from the church with law enforcement, with politicians, sitting at the table with the youth. Because if you want to know what it is that they want to help save their lives, if you ask them, they'll tell you. And that's been the success of our programs, is communicating with the youth who feel that no one's listening. And so if we come in together, I believe we can work something out together.
Thank you. So group questions. Don't wait too long to jump in and make an awkward silence for everybody right now. But yeah, let's just start off. What are some of the biggest misconceptions or stigmas around mass incarceration or around being a felon? Or
Yes, this is something that I was thinking about previously, and as I worked with different men and women coming out of prison, you had a ton of people come out of prison that had a drug distribution charge or drug possession charge, right? Like a ton of people like that I would help assist, but then I would also help assist people that had murder charges and manslaughter charges. And oftentimes there was this preconceived notion among people on the outside that if I was helping someone with a manslaughter charge, man, be careful. I don't know how long, they're gonna last and stay out of prison. And what I came to learn working with many people that had manslaughter charges was that they had the lowest recidivism rate. They would do like 20 years in prison, 15 years in prison, and they were done. They didn't want to go back. And I remember one of the first people that got a job had a manslaughter charge. It was like aggravated assault. It was a very aggressive charge. I was able to get him a job in Patterson, me and my fellow employment specialist, and it was a union position. He was making maybe $35 an hour. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it was a good paying job for someone right out of prison. And that was like before overtime. And he was one of our most successful clients. Did not go back, ended up doing really well, not just with his employment, but also reestablishing relationships in his family. So I think that's one misconception. I think watching shows like CSI or, I don't know, just watching TV will really mess you up. And it will make you scared of someone that you don't know. Like, you don't know their story. You don't know who they are at the heart of who they are. And oftentimes I would sit down with people who had these charges, And because we showed love to them, one, they appreciated us, but also I was able to break stereotypes in my mind, and I think that that's important, for us all, if we ever engage someone that has been in prison, being able to look at them with the eyes of redemption, like I said earlier. But yeah, that's one misconception or preconceived notion that I've seen. So, yeah.
I'll definitely agree with that. I was going to use exactly where you ended off because, when people hear about why someone is incarcerated or what they've done, it's like you automatically judge them. They're being judged again, tried and convicted once again, but you don't know them. You have no idea what happened in that situation or in their life in general, and I think that, that right there puts us up, to the point where we think we're the judge and jury. We think we have the right to judge their life and their life decisions, and you don't, because you don't know their story. So I think that is a big misconception that I will lead with. But also, too, is that, when we hear about gun violence happening in our community, we're immediately victim blaming and shaming. Why were they outside at that time of night? What were they doing in that community? Why were they in that neighborhood? What made them, who was looking for them, that they wanted to kill them? And at the end of the day, they're not responsible for what happened to them. Even if something even if there was something that put them in that situation for whatever reason, but a victim is not responsible for what happens to them. You were victimized. And so to further, blame and shame the victim, it only prevents you from looking at them as a victim and someone who is in need of help. And so their trauma goes unhealed and unaddressed, and then you'll see what happens when that does happen. It doesn't rebuild or build up strong people. It breaks you down. So I think if we can just stop the judging and stop acting like we know people, we hardly know the people who we think we know. So you definitely don't know anyone you don't know in any capacity. So
Forgiveness goes a long way. In order for a person to get past his past, he has to feel he's been forgiven by the people he's done harm against, the justice system where he serves his time, in front of the Lord, and friends and family. And the hardest part would be to forgive themselves. And once a person can forgive themselves and recognize that everybody else forgives them, the obstacles in front of them will be the same, but they will address it in a different way. One of the things about coming home from being incarcerated is they put you right back where you got in trouble. And as soon as you get home, your friends are offering you drugs and opportunities to get back into what got you incarcerated. And if a person can get past that, get to a church, get to an organization, they'll still have to deal with it. But when forgiveness is on the table for them, they have a better mindset to be able to not be pigeonholed over what they did yesterday.
You want to add to that?
Yeah, just one thing I would add to that, and what has been shared is that it's important to understand that we're all, like everyone that's here, everyone that's watching, we're all one bad decision away from being in that position as well. Right. And this is more of like a Christian perspective, because I've spoken to a lot of different Christians that would disagree with this, which is very interesting. But it's hard for some people to look at somebody that's in prison with eyes of empathy, because they feel like, I would never do that. I would never sell drugs the way that person sells. I would never commit that kind of crime. But it's important to understand that we're all bad, without Jesus. Again, this is like a Christian perspective, right? And you may be watching and may not believe this, but I believe that we all inherently are capable of doing really bad things. For me, personally, I believe that the reason why I have not, and I continue to make the best decisions for me is because of my relationship with Jesus. But if it wasn't for that, though, I could be that person. So because of that, I can look at somebody that has committed any crime and have empathy for them. And I think that's really important, because why would you give someone a second chance if you have no empathy? If they're just a bad person, right? They're just really, really bad. I could never be them. So I just wanted to add that, because I think that all of us are, one or two bad decisions away from being in that position. And because of that, I think it's important for us to extend grace to people, because that could be us too. So,
as I started tonight talking about, it's about listening and learning, a title of a book comes to mind called The Power of Proximity. And that when you're talking about justice issues, you can't do it from a distance, right? You have to be in proximity with the people that you want to serve and the issues that you want to address. But it wasn't until I lived in a men's home, quit my job, I had free cable. I had free Wi-Fi, I should say. I only had to pay for cable. It was great. Had a dog, lived rent-free. It's my grandma's old house. It was amazing, right? Quit my job to move into a rat-infested, bed-bug-infested, drug and alcohol rehabilitation home in the middle of Pittsburgh. Talk about a reality check, a little suburban white boy myself, right? It wasn't until sitting at the table, just playing cards with these dudes, making some expired cookie dough that got donated to the home or whatever, right? Then I started to hear their story, and it once you hear people's stories, once you live in proximity with them, it changes your entire paradigm. And so those that are watching, maybe you got a little bit more affluence, maybe you've had certain privileges that the very demographic of people that we're talking about haven't had that access to. I challenge you to go outside your comfort zone, to sit down and have one conversation, because if you have that one conversation, it'll change you. But I'm moderating. I'm not allowed to contribute. So we're talking about an extremely daunting issue, right? I shared on Sunday that the criminal justice system didn't just pop up in 1970 with the war on drugs, right? It's kind of baked into the fabric of who America is, hence why the lifetime likelihoods are skewed the way that they are, right? And so this is a huge topic that there's been millions of experts on. Here's how you fix it or change it or this or that, right? So how do we as a group listening, how do we respond to such a daunting topic, right? Individually and corporately. I know we've touched on some of these things, but how do we respond to, because many people might be like, I don't even know where to start. You got to be unmuted for that.
Volunteering. I really think that that's the beginning of service, right? Doing it, out of the goodness in your heart, being empathetic to people and their situations. And I think volunteering is such a beautiful thing, and that is the beginning, because this is an overwhelming topic: reentry, homelessness, poverty. Those are wicked problems, gun violence. And so, there's no one solution. I know folks are tired of coming out to meetings and hearing panel discussions, and they leave and they're like, I don't know what to do. You have to connect yourself, and you have to definitely volunteer. I can't say everybody know like who the Anti-Violence Coalition is, or Hudson Partnership CMO, or Go Get My Kids, or the New Jersey Reentry Program. No, some people may not know, but social media is key, right? There's a lot of advertising and marketing happening on social media from nonprofits trying to get that information out. There's a lot of tabling within the community, at schools, at events, to have you a table to give that information out. We occupy corners to give that information out. But I think it's very important to volunteer and connect yourself to agencies or organizations doing the work. I think that's a beginning. I really think so. And attending meetings, right? City council meetings, anything virtual that's talking about this subject or a subject that you're interested in. I think that it's important to educate yourself, but, just go and volunteer a little bit and do some work and get some knowledge, and I think it'll take you a long way.
And to piggyback off of that, I think that's spot on. I think, speaking to the point you were making about proximity, I think volunteering puts you in that position, because now you're in proximity with the people that are in need. So I think that that's really, really necessary. I think that's doable. There's so many different organizations within Jersey City that you can tap into. You can get connected through, I feel like, Facebook, right? Instagram, so you can find out how to connect with these different organizations through social media. And then I think also educating yourself on these issues is really important too, because I think as we educate, our eyes open up, and it may further inspire us to want to engage in the community. But I think, there's something so powerful about proximity. I was born and raised in Jersey City, and when I went to college, I went to Seton Hall University, right? So going to Seton Hall University exposed me to a completely different demographic of students that were a lot more affluent, and that had a different upbringing than I did, that had a different vernacular, right? For example, I grew up in Jersey City. It was really common for me to walk up to my friends and say, yo, what's poppin'? Like, that's just the way that we greeted each other, and it wasn't weird. I went to college, and I would greet friends, and they would say, hey, how are you? How's it going? Right? That was odd to me because I had never been in proximity with people that had a different cultural expression, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I was able to bridge gaps between different cultural groups through that experience. So proximity is important. So you might be living, for example, in downtown Jersey City, where rent is a completely different conversation, right? Right. So you might be living in that community, and that's great. Being able to afford to live there, that's awesome. I think that's great. I'm not bashing you if you live in downtown, more power to you. But I think that it's great to also to come to sections of Jersey City like Greenville, where the culture is different, where you can be in proximity with people that have different needs than you might have living in certain parts of downtown Jersey City. So just as an example of what that proximity might look like in the context of Jersey City, but yeah.
And while you're in that proximity, you ask the kids, you ask the community, what is it we can do to help you stop the violence? What is it we can do to help you have a better life? What is it that we can do to create opportunities that you can get to? Excuse me. A lot of the issue in Jersey City with the youth is they can't travel out of their prospective neighborhoods without it being an issue. Excuse me. But with the support of the church and the communities, and asking that question, and then fulfilling the question, what they ask for as best that we can, I believe will open up a wider opportunity for communication between our kids and our community and our church and our police department and our politicians. So it's like being married. Excuse me. I had a pastor, his version was that he would buy his wife, excuse me, red roses every week. And she would come and walk past the roses and not pay it any attention. And just went on for some time, and finally he asked her, he said, honey, I spend $50 a week giving you fresh red roses and you haven't said anything about it. She said, well, I really don't like flowers. If you want to impress me and move me, buy me some shoes. So if you don't know what it is that the kids want, then you can spend time, wasting time, trying to give them something that doesn't move them. So once we collectively come together and ask that question, it'll give us the tools to work with the community with knowledge and information and wisdom.
Definitely. Thank you guys so much for sharing. There's happy to, if you want to message our church page, if you want to message my own personal page, happy to give you Pam's personal cell phone. I'm just kidding. No, but happy to connect you with so many organizations. And what I love about our church, and me being an extreme extrovert, I get to know a lot of people. And so if you're like, I love kids, I want to be involved with kids, like, I'll send you in the right direction, right? That's my full-time job, right? If you're like, if you stick me in a room full of kids, I may die. will point you in a different direction, right? This needs a multi-pronged approach, and so if you're interested in being more involved in volunteering, there's so many amazing organizations, and the more collective we are in working together, that's the only way we're actually going to see true change happening within Jersey City. But one final kind of group question before we wrap up, and I think it's important to talk about it, and maybe it's just because of our own church's experience around this, but we live in what arguably is the most diverse city, right? We love quoting random websites that label us the most diverse city. New York City is pretty big. I don't know. I'm just saying. But we live in an extremely diverse city, and we celebrate that diversity. We do a multicultural festival here every year, right? But what is the role of ICE, and especially more recently, or some may argue it's always been there, the demonizing of immigrant populations in connection to mass incarceration?
Yes, that's a great question as well. For a point in time, when I was with the New Jersey Reentry Corporation, I worked out of a pilot West New York office. West New York is a predominantly Spanish-speaking city within Hudson County. I think that it has been said that there's 50,000 or 55,000 people that live in that area, but there are far more as well that are undocumented. So my responsibility was serving that community, serving men and women that have been incarcerated in that community. That's a very challenging component of reentry, because you're dealing with multiple challenges, right? You're coming out of prison. You may have had a green card when you went in. When you came out, it's expired, and now you're trying. And you know, you were paying your taxes. You were a law-abiding employee of a company, and you may have made an error, a bad decision. But yeah, it's a very complex situation that a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out. I think one of the best things that we can do is extend a hand of support and help where we can. One of the directions that I ended up pointing a lot of clients to was to some pro bono attorneys within Jersey City that specifically help those that are undocumented who went to prison. Again, these are people that went to prison or went to jail, had their green card, came out, and it's expired at this point, and they're looking to continue to work and support their family that is still here. And yeah, that's a very complex situation. I'm an advocate personally for immigration reform. I am Dominican and Puerto Rican, but my mother immigrated here from the Dominican Republic, was eventually able to get her citizenship. And when it comes to this whole conversation of ICE as well, I think the complexity of it is understanding that what we call someone, some people use the word illegal alien, right? I don't like that, because I don't think anybody's an alien. I think we're all human beings. I'd rather use the term undocumented, because that's really what it is. They don't have their documents. But it's important to understand that when we watch the news or when we look at and hear different conversations about this, when someone says a person that's a criminal and they're undocumented, I think it's important to understand that when different government agencies are interpreting that can be somebody that jaywalked, and they're called a criminal. Someone that didn't pay parking tickets. Criminal alien, right? So I think that conversation is really complex, because we're calling people criminals. I'm a criminal. I jaywalked 1,000 times. How many parking tickets? Has anybody in this room ever had a driving ticket? Anybody? Right. So I guess we're all criminals. No, I'm just kidding. We're not criminals. But I think that makes it a very complex conversation. And there are resources, though, in Jersey City specifically, pro bono offices that people can tap into for support when it comes to obtaining their green card or work authorization cards.
Yeah, I agree. It's very complex. I don't know much around ICE. I do know that for the first time, when we had a family who was undocumented, for lack of a better word, it was after COVID and in COVID. Prior to that I never had a population of people with an issue like that. And we did what we would do in any situation. It was, they called us and they were in need of a bed for a house that they were living in, and we found them a bed, dropped it off, asked them if they needed anything else. They had some food insecurity issues. They were scared to kind of tell us what was going on because of the situation, and we had to explain to them, like, we're not the police. Like, we're a nonprofit agency, and if you need support, resources, and services, we're going to find them for you. We also connect them to lawyers who would represent them pro bono. I know the Waterfront Project was doing that for a very long time, with making sure that, folks don't get kicked out of their homes, making sure that people who were undocumented, had the resources and services to kind of, fight for themselves and have the legal system fight for them as well. So, I mean, we would do, if there are any people out there who is that a part of that population who would need help, we would service you like anyone else. We're not reporting, you to anyone. That's not our job. Our job is to help you get those services that you're in need for. And we will do just that without harming you further. And hopefully we can also assist you in getting whatever paperwork you need so that that system is not even coming down on you. But I'm all for immigration reform, of course.
I haven't had the opportunity to deal with anyone who was dealing with ICE. All I know is that there's only one race. We separated by a lot of names and colors, but there's really only one race. And, excuse me, to treat another human being in such a way, I believe is a crime against humanity, no matter how they phrase it. I also believe that, excuse me, that it's also a part of the 13th Amendment, the exception clause, where slavery is still in the books, and it allows them to legally do the things that they do to their own brothers. So, at the end of the day, excuse me, I would, if I ran into someone with the issue, I would refer them. There are a lot of referrals, a lot of people who work in the community to help them. But in the long term, it gets back to removing the exception clause from Amendment 13, because as long as they can legally do what they're doing, they're going to do it. And I've never, I grew up in the projects, and I've never seen a bully stop bullying anyone because they asked them to. There usually had to be some intervention, and or the person stop running and turn around and fight. And these people aren't in a position to fight. And so, as a community, as an American, we should support them in this cause, because they have a right to a good life like everybody else.
Yeah, thanks guys for contributing. I'll bite my tongue. We've had experience of members being detained by ICE right here in Jersey City, coming back from destination weddings, all of that, and the rules of the justice system are different for ICE cases in terms of what you can expect, courtroom appearances, all of that, expectations, and what has happened more recently with bail reform is that county jails, local jails have increased their ICE detention capabilities to create revenue, and so it's important for us to be aware of these issues and continue to raise them, as our church has many times. So unfortunately, we don't really have time maybe to open it up to questions. Anybody that maybe has dropped a question in the comments, I'll do my best to follow up with you and get in contact with you and everything like that. Encourage you to reach out to our church. We have a whole resource page that we created as well around mass incarceration. I got a hand in the room. Hand in the room. Question. So let me just say the question so people online can hear. In the crowd, they were highlighting the exception clause of the 13th Amendment. If you're not familiar, it's the abolishment of slavery with the exception of, and I don't want to misquote it, and so the exception clause has been there since the 13th Amendment. And then the question was, is there any Congress, anybody in Congress right now pushing to eliminate it?
So there was a huge movement, Amend the 13th, started by Dennis Febo, and he's made tremendous, paths forward. I'm glad Robin Gorman is here because I followed the movement, I supported the movement, spoke at one of the first press conferences at Lincoln Park, and followed it through, and it passed and went forward. And so where are we, Robin?
Thanks, Pam.
Good, you look good.
The movement, as Pam said, there were actually a couple of states before us that started that, and they were successful. And certainly we would love to see it happen on the national level. But as Pam referenced, Dennis Febo in New Jersey was really the pioneer in starting to actually speak to folks who were incarcerated and saying, do you realize that this is what our Constitution says, on the state level and on the national level, and started that movement with people who were incarcerated and then brought it outside of the walls and really tried to get our New Jersey legislators on board. And it's embarrassing, actually, when you look at the states that have passed this and removed that language from their own constitutions, and New Jersey will still have it. So it got up to the legislature. And what we were trying to do was get it onto the ballot for a vote. And in order to do that, there's a whole process, and the timing has to be right so that it passes through the different committees and can be added onto the ballot when it's election time. And unfortunately, at the time, the Speaker of the Assembly and the leader in the Senate, we couldn't get it on the agenda for a vote to get it onto the ballot. And I feel it's shameful. Especially when you look at some of the other states that have already passed it, that New Jersey is so far behind. And the one thing that wasn't mentioned here, which I think is really critical, is New Jersey is the state with the largest racial disparities, both for adults that are incarcerated and for juveniles. And here, we like to think of ourselves as being so liberal and so progressive, right? And there are states that we would look down on and think otherwise, and they actually have better data on that than we do. So I think it was asked before what you can do with politicians, and I have to tell you, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets the grease. Like, you can't stop. If you're really interested in these causes, it's very easy to get very discouraged and just to stop sending the emails and stop doing the phone calling and stop showing up on the steps with the megaphone. But sometimes I think that's the only thing that really gets the attention, because as soon as the heat on these subjects goes down, the next new shiny thing comes up and people forget about it, and you have to be persistent. And I think it's easier to be persistent when you join organizations that are going to back you, like Jersey City Together, right? It's not just one congregation, it's 40 coming together, and now they're spreading out across New Jersey. And my organization as a nonprofit is a part of that as well. So I think we need to band together and be loud.
And in addition, as Robin said, there are states around the country who just went to court and won the ability to remove the 13th Amendment. Excuse me. But on the national level, in doing I only did Google research, so I can't, stand here and defend. But based on Google research, there are just as many people outside of prison under slave conditions, whether it's in the slave trade, whether it's in a warehouse where they're made to work more hours than they should, where they're not getting paid, where women are being paid less than men. All of these things are a result, in my opinion, of legally being able to still treat people like 3/5 of a person, and still being able to hold over a country the threat of slavery, while at the same time functioning as a country on slavery. And I think the only way that will change is, one day all the slaves just don't show up and say, we need to renegotiate. Because as long as we keep showing up and doing what's asked of us in that capacity, they don't have to negotiate. So as a community, as a people, we would come together and make a stand, and rather than march in the streets and tear down our buildings, we'll all stay home one day. All the kids will stay home, all the workers will stay home, everybody will just stay home. Because this is not really about anything other than money. They use color, they use the different words of racism, but it's about money. And so, in my opinion, if we were to come together and say, okay, June 15th or whatever, we're going to come together and everybody's going to stay home, and so we can negotiate this slavery issue without being held up in a committee. That makes no sense to me. How does something so important get pushed to the back burner and people are continuously and continually being made to live under slavery? So I think collectively, I thank everybody for being here today, that this is something we can do. And anybody who has any ideas on how to get it done, I'll be willing to work with them to get it done. Because I don't want to get up tomorrow and make a better slave. I want to get up tomorrow and create an opportunity for a youth or person, no matter what nationality, the opportunity to be an American, the opportunity to be a kid, the opportunity to have a family.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And to that, statistically, if you didn't know, New Jersey is below the national average in terms of wealth gap racially. And like we said, you would think New Jersey, liberal state, we should be at the top tier of that. And yes, we're below what the national average is in terms of wealth inequality between a white family, Hispanic family, Asian family, white family. And so there's so many more statistics that we could talk about. I really do wish we had more time to take questions too. This topic is so broad, it's hard. We could talk about gerrymandering, we could talk about redlining, we could talk about wealth inequality, we could talk about the way we police, right? All of these things add layers to it for sure. But I'm going to give you 30 seconds to solve all of mass incarceration. Go. No, I'm just kidding. 30 seconds to I say 30 because I know you're going to take 2 to 3 minutes, to leave us with one final thing. If you want somebody to walk away with one thing from tonight, highlight one last thing, or man, I didn't say this yet, I got to say it. We'll go reverse. I'll start with you, Dwayne.
When you go home tonight, pray that God does what he needs to do through us so we can get it done. That's it.
Man, thank you. Pam.
Okay, brother.
She's going to take your 30 seconds.
Can I follow up with that, all right? Okay. I just really want to thank you for hosting, for facilitating, for coordinating. I'm happy to be in the house of worship, and this just makes me feel excited that there are people, who've been doing the work, who will continue to do the work, and looking forward to kicking over those tables, right? So I'm just happy to continue the conversation on how we can better serve people and how we can make people's lives different and successful, right, with their transformation into what God wanted them to be. So I'm happy about ongoing conversations and people being boots on the ground, making the magic happen, and this is one of those moments. So I just want to thank you guys for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you as well, Pastor Liebe, Pastor David, for facilitating this, organizing this. One thought I'll leave you with, Dr. A.R. Bernard, he's a pastor in New York City, once said that you can only think at the level of what you're exposed to. So ultimately, if we're not exposing ourselves to these different things, our perspective can only go so far. So I think it's important to expose ourselves to new things, to these statistics that we're speaking about, to this information, just for personal reflection that could lead for us to be more loving people, ultimately. We're not going to solve the problem in one conversation, but I think that one conversation at a time can make a difference and impact in the people that are around us in our proximity. So, and one thing I did want to share was that when it comes to folks that, like we were talking about, may not be documented, I know you shared that you're a resource for them, and the organizations that I've worked with in Jersey City, one of which is the New Jersey Reentry Corporation, they're also a resource as well. Even if they can't solve all the problems, they're there to just give whatever they can give to help. So thank you guys. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you to everyone that joined in tonight. Sure, you can clap. Sure. Those in the room, there's still a few more copies of the resource guide and a longer list of some of the statistics that I mentioned in Sunday message as well as tonight as well. But we're a church, so we'll be churchy, and I want to invite Pastor Lippe to just close us out with a few final remarks and prayer.
Can we give it up for our panelists again? If we could rise, we could stand up. I just want to thank you for those that are here. And again, Pastor Dave, thank you so much for leading this. Robin, thank you so much. I was trying to figure out from the back, who's this lady that I see? Robin, for those of you who don't know, it's a beautiful space. And Pam, Pam is right. You're the new director for that too, right? The Cove? Hey, of course, you're in everything, Pam. Yes. So we're so thankful that the Cove is part of this neighborhood. And, we'll just continue to pray that better resources continue to come. Because we know we're geographically situated in a good spot, like for Jersey City, for Hudson County, and we continue to pray that God will help us to use all our resources together for His glory. So let's pray, and we close out today. God, we just want to thank you. We thank you for our freedom, but today, Lord, we do not forget our brothers and sisters that are that don't have this freedom, that today feel hopeless, and for whatever reason, whether it's their own choices or it's just because they don't have enough more money for bail or having good lawyers, Lord, they're there, and you identify with them, Jesus. You are wrongfully convicted. You were wrongfully murdered, and unfortunately, God, we also pray, God, for reform with our death penalty in this country. We pray, God, that you have mercy on us, Lord. And we pray, Lord God, that as we go home, that we will not feel helpless, but we will be hopeful that together, with your help, God, we could do all things. And help us, God, to be agents of prevention in our local schools, with our own kids, for those of us that are parents, with our nephews and nieces around us, God, for us, God, to just continue to be a space of encouragement, God, for so many people that need it right now. Continue to pray for our Jersey City. You brought us here for a reason. We pray, God, for the city. We pray, God, for every person here. Again, bless the panelists. You know their needs. You know their hopes and dreams. We pray for them, God, and we thank you for what you've done tonight. In the name of Jesus, we pray these things. Amen. God bless you. Dismiss. There's still a little bit more refreshments in the back, too, so please grab something. Thank you again, also, our hospitality team, for putting this together. So, thank you.